So today I wanted to talk about my experience of doing a PhD, what I've learnt since starting, and whether this is going the way that I'm expecting. And these are some of the questions that I've gotten whilst talking to people who are considering doing a PhD. So I thought to make a video on this in case this helps some of you, and I'm really looking forward to making the same kind of video at the end of my PhD just to see how my feelings will evolve. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Yana. I'm about 8 months or so into my PhD, which I'm doing here at the University of Melbourne, and I'm looking at how personality affects seeking out and engaging in wellbeing practices. On this channel, I pretty much share my life. I make videos on a bunch of different topics, from student life to fashion. Feel free to check it out if you're interested. But yeah, today will be a bit of a chatty podcast style video, so grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's get right into it. So why did I decide to do a PhD in the first place? This is a question that I think a lot of students tend to get, and it's a pretty fair question that varies from people to people. I personally really enjoyed doing research. I had some volunteering experience on a study, as well as working as an RA and during honours as well, carrying out my research topic. And even though all of the topics were so different, I enjoyed all of the parts that went into it. I really enjoy kind of just the mundane aspects of trying to find participants, trying to design the studies, putting the questions into the Qualtrics or whatever, just kind of your everyday kind of day-to-day research tasks, but also kind of the more bigger picture things like thinking of research designs to answer a particular question, reading literature and thinking of ways to answer questions that haven't been answered before. And then another side to this is a very practical side. So as I enjoy research, I want to pursue a research career, and it just makes sense to do a PhD. I know that you don't necessarily have to have a PhD as you're getting into research, but having one definitely helps, particularly for career progression. And another reason why a lot of people tend to do a PhD, and I think this definitely kind of played a role into me deciding to do it, but it wasn't a deciding factor, but it definitely appeals to me more compared to other master's degrees, is the fact that you essentially get paid to do a PhD. Yeah, the scholarship and stuff is competitive, and I didn't manage to get the full scholarship, but at least I don't have to pay any course fees, and I still get paid a living stipend. Which if I was to do a master's, I'll have to spend $100K or so just to study it and find some way to fund my daily living expenses as well on top of that. Yeah, so that's not really the only reason, but it's definitely something that kind of played a role. And have I changed my mind about pursuing an academic career since starting? I think actually it solidified my want to stay in academia, because I think I'm a lot more exposed to all of the good sides, and I can see a lot of the benefits that academics get that other jobs may not necessarily get. For example, the complete flexibility to do whatever you want, essentially, to some extent. Choosing your own hours, not having to be able to wear a uniform. Just being able to express yourself that other kind of more traditional office jobs tend to sort of stifle. And yeah, the fact that every day looks different as well. I know there's other jobs where there's a lot of variety in what you do, but I think in research that definitely rings true, particularly if you get a combined teaching and research role, then you have a lot of responsibilities, but it sounds exciting. And this kind of view, I think, is a little bit surprising, because I am also seeing a lot of negative sides to academia, things like burnout, overworking, the stress of having to secure grants in order to keep your job, and a lot of jobs being very unstable and unsecure. And yeah, just the competitiveness aspect is quite daunting. But yeah, I guess personally for me, I think those negatives are still outweighed by the positive side of things. But I know that this is quite different to other people, and quite a few people I've talked to who have also recently started. They're already looking to get out of academia, and there are also other people that I know of that tend to do a complete 180. They're going for an academic job, but once they finish, they're like, nah, don't want to do this anymore, want to go into the industry. And yeah, that's fine too. And I am like low-key kind of expecting myself to sort of change, but it's still, I think, on the cards. I suppose being more exposed to kind of the academic world gives me a better sense of realism almost as to what my options are, and makes me see that it's great to stay in academia, but also if I don't make it, then it's fine to find another industry job. But yeah, I guess on a related note, in terms of changing my mind about doing a PhD, I don't think that's the case. And even talking to people who are set on going into industry after their PhD, they also share a view that it's not completely futile to do a PhD if you don't intend to stay in academia. And it's because I think the degree teaches you quite a lot of useful skills that you don't necessarily get to learn in bachelor's. And that's things like being able to come up with your own research agenda and being able to be completely self-sufficient in your learning, as well as all of the skills that you kind of pick up on your own, out of your own volition. And yeah, I think a lot of employers tend to value that. And then I guess if you also think of it as being like a kind of a job, then doing this for 3-4 years isn't so bad if you get paid. Yes, you're being very underpaid, but at least you're kind of exchanging the lack of payment for a learning opportunity. And it sets you up to have a career in a very diverse range of fields. I think probably the only case where a PhD wouldn't be useful, and I would regret doing a PhD if I decided to do something like, I don't know, become a beauty therapist or something like that. Something like a trade, I suppose, that doesn't necessarily require you to research or go through information, but is very like hands-on kind of job. Then I would kind of struggle to see how my PhD would be useful. Though, yeah, I suppose the work ethic that I gained from it could be useful. And I've gotten some comments, as well as my family asking and people around me, about what the workload is like. And I think there's this assumption that PhD students need to be in the lab 24/7. They're just working like crazy. They get no time to do anything. But I don't think that that's quite accurate, at least not in my situation anyway. I think in general it's a bit difficult to describe what the workload is like overall, because it kind of ebbs and flows. There are very like quiet periods where I do maybe, 5 hours in the week of solid work. And then there are times where I'm working at uni for like 10, 12 hours. But I think so far my baseline has been quite similar to sort of normal full-time hours. And yeah, like Melbourne Uni anyway, expects you to work 40 hours on your PhD a week. But yeah, I guess similar to a 9-to-5 job, it's not like you're working completely at 100% capacity all 40 hours of your week. Your time is also taken up by meetings, by talking with your colleagues and things like that. And it's quite similar in a PhD as well. There's a lot of like talks to go to, lab meetings, hub meetings, things like that aren't necessarily 100% related to your PhD. But they're useful to go to. Okay, I'm kind of moving away from my notes. But I guess what I mean to say is that there's a lot of other things that are related to your PhD work that aren't necessarily contributing to your thesis. And I would say that they sit very comfortably in that 40 hours as well. And during the quiet periods of my admin work and stuff, I've also found that it was kind of the case as well. But at some points of the semester, like during marking and kind of the end of the semester, where I have a big like tutoring workload as well as my coordination assistant job stuff, then that is when I find that I'm going over the 40 hours a week because obviously I'm doing a PhD and I'm doing this other work on top of that as well. Yeah, okay, so just back to what I wanted to talk about in my notes. I didn't actually do much work when I first started because I wasn't sure what I was doing, and this is like pretty much anyone will tell you that that's what they did as well. They just kind of bummed around trying to do stuff or look busy or just, enjoy their time. And it's quite fun whilst it lasted to just kind of focus more on getting into sort of the academic community rather than your thesis. And about like 6 or so months in, probably a little bit less, I found that I have a lot of tasks that need to be done. And I think as soon as you know your topic and you've designed your studies, then you suddenly have a lot of tasks to do. Whether it is to set up for data collection, start writing first sections of things, or doing ethics, things like that. Just to give a more concrete example, I finished data collection on one of my studies, so a big task of that was cleaning and analyzing the data, and then pretty much writing the entire paper. And that's a pretty big multi-month task. And in terms of structuring the workload, it really depends on the individual. I personally try to prefer to stick to 9 to 5 type of hours, though admittedly, I think I do more of like a 10 to 6, 10 to 7, something like that. I have a friend who's trying to do like a 8 to 2, 8 to 3 type of schedule, so that she has the entire day to enjoy. Others tend to kind of sort of ebb and flow and work in all sorts of hours, which sounds chaotic to me, but if it works for them, it works for them. But like something that I really love about the PhD is the fact that even though I've set a sort of like a 9 to 5 schedule, I don't tend to stick to it all the time, and it's fine. There's no, I guess, repercussions. As long as I'm happy with the level of work that I'm putting out each week, then it's fine. So there has been days where I'm working like a 12 to 4, other days I'm working 9 to 7, 9 to 8 even, but it really varies. And I think I'm quite comfortable to sort of keep that kind of full-time working hours within kind of the constraints of my energy, and work more when I have more energy and more motivation, and work less when I'm really struggling with my energy levels. And I guess a tip for that I have is to set boundaries. This is something that I've heard from other people as well. And everybody has different boundaries, whether they stop work at a certain time, whether they don't work on the weekends, whether they don't work on certain days. It's very individual, and it depends on how you wish to work. Personally, I will work on the weekends. I don't mind working into the evening, but if I do have a bit of a late one, then I'll try and take off some time from next week or next day, just to kind of have a bit of a balance, And what about other commitments? So I think this is something that I mentioned a little bit earlier. There are, in addition to doing your PhD, there's often other commitments that are in the way. Well, not really in the way, but they are competing for that space. And personally, I kind of see it as your commitments to the PhD, so things that are directly related to the PhD, and then also kind of things outside of that help your professional development. So things like talks, lab meetings. It could also be like taking time out to learn a different skill that's not necessarily relevant to a PhD, or it could be kind of relevant to a PhD, but you still have to learn the skill. It doesn't necessarily get put into your thesis, but you still have to learn the skill. And then for me, I've got my paid work, which is the tutoring, and then the coordinator assistant job that I do. That job is quite variable. In terms of the coordination assistant, I think I'm expected to put in about 7 hours a week to it. And I find that during some points of the semester, I'm definitely putting in double or even triple as much work into that. But during quiet times, like in January, I practically didn't do anything. So I think it kind of evens out. And then with tutoring, personally, I try to take subjects that have a class every fortnight, so I don't have to prepare for class every week. But the catch with the tutoring is that there is a 3-week marking period where I have to mark my classes. So that's about 40 or so students. It doesn't sound like a lot when I say it, but it is about 20 to 25 minutes per paper. So it does add up, particularly in a short period of time. And in addition to that, I'm the treasurer for the Graduate Researchers in Psychological Sciences. That's the graduate society for psychology students who are doing honours, masters, or PhDs. I'm on the executive committee this year just to gain some experience on being on a committee like that. And also it kind of helps me structure and pencil in almost mandatory social time. But yeah, that kind of has been keeping me busy, particularly when we were planning our camp. That was quite a lot of things to organise and quite a lot of planning and stuff on my part in terms of like budgeting. But yeah, it is also a bit of fun as well. And then I've got my personal commitments. I'm trying to take YouTube a bit more seriously this year, so trying to keep a regular schedule and just get videos out. It does take a while, but it is also like something that I enjoy doing in my spare time, and I guess it competes with other spare time things that I have on, which is just, plain old good relaxing and doing my other hobbies. I guess I found the main commitments, like the main things that I have to do, quite hectic to juggle, particularly during like the busy semesters where I do have a bigger workload. So yeah, I'm still trying to learn how to fit it all in. But yeah, like I said earlier, at the end of the day, it's not like the 40 hours that I'm spending on the PhD. I have to do all of this extra work on top of that. I think those 40 hours also still account for things like the extra lab meetings, workshops, as well as a bit of a portion of work. But it does get pretty busy, and I find that I do have to be quite smart in the way that I'm managing my time and prioritizing tasks to make sure that I don't overwork myself, but also do stuff on time. If you're interested, I have a video where I go through my productivity system that I use for my PhD. If you haven't yet already, check it out. I talk more about how I manage my tasks and plan things in my PhD and kind of what apps I use and stuff. And that really helps. I know people tend to like using different things, but I guess, yeah, just finding something that works for you is quite important. And how is a PhD compared to bachelor's? So this is something that I was wondering about before I started, how big of a transition this was going to be. But yeah, I guess overall I found that the PhD is a lot less stressful than doing a normal degree, but at the same time a little bit more intense as well. So yeah, let me explain. I guess the ways in which that a PhD is a lot less stressful than doing like a bachelor's degree, maybe even a master's. There's no coursework, which is a big one, and there's no grades. So there's really like not really a worry about being able to submit assignments on time and being able to do them well, or kind of trying to track to make sure that your GPA is good. I think that removed pressure allows me to be engaged in the content a lot more and explore ideas that I come across, even though they might not be super related. And I also found that a lot of the deadlines are really flexible. So apparently it's quite easy. And this is the case for Melbourne Uni. I'm not sure if it's different for other universities, but I'm sure it's quite similar. But yeah, if you're struggling or having some delays on your studies, it's quite easy to be able to move deadlines for progress reviews if you feel like you can't meet them. And a lot of like the progress reviews here, they call it confirmation. I found that idea or the concept of that meeting, particularly in Australia, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure about how other countries work. There's not really an expectation of you having to pass a test necessarily. It's more of a collaborative kind of effort to get you to pass and finish the PhD on time. So even if there is something wrong, the point of that meeting is to kind of catch any things that can stop someone from completing the PhD, which is a good thing. And I think in this vein, this kind of captures the sort of essence of what an education system should be like, where it is supportive, where it is more about what you're learning rather than how well you're retaining information, and it's very adjustable to your own pace rather than some sort of like set pace or metric that you have to hit. And I think, yeah, for me, that definitely takes the pressure off things and makes me enjoy learning. But I can also see how like a complete lack of pressure could also go the other way as well and be perhaps daunting for some people. But I guess, yeah, it's something to reflect on depending on what kind of person you are. And in the ways that a PhD is a lot more involved and intense than undergrad, is having to take more of a responsibility and initiative for your own self-learning and kind of getting opportunities, seeking out opportunities, because no one's going to kind of hold your hand and feed you things like I feel like they sort of did in undergrad. Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot more responsibility, or a sense of responsibility, over myself and my research, which is great because I feel like I can take full ownership of my work and I can be engaged a lot more because it's kind of like my own thing that I'm doing, like my own baby. But it also is a little bit scary because it's like, what if I make a mistake? And I feel a lot more terrified about the possibility of making a mistake because, yeah, it's just, I feel like I have a lot more vested interest in what I'm doing in my studies and things like that. Whereas, like, for example, in undergrad, if there's an assignment and the topic wasn't well thought out, or it ended up being a bit of weirdly kind of designed or something like that, then if I didn't do so well in it, or I wasn't as engaged in it, then I could have like sort of brush it off as, well, it's just one assignment that's not like super well designed, and yeah, whatever. It's not what I came up with. But I guess because the PhD is like something that mostly the topic came out of my own volition, I feel like there's a lot more at stake if there is a study that's not well designed, that I feel like it's kind of comes back to me. But yeah, I hope that didn't like discourage anyone. And also, on an unrelated note, I feel like I'm spending a lot more time in one location just working on the PhD. Whereas in undergrad, I'd kind of like move around and be a bit of a nomad on campus, and just move from location to location, having coffees and just walking around. Whereas I feel like I'm a little bit more serious with my work ethic. And I'm not sure if it's because the program is more intense, or whether it's because I've just improved in my work ethic and can sit for longer periods of time. But I suppose overall, it's definitely a lot more of a workload compared to a bachelor's, I think, but probably a little bit less than a full-time job. And the kind of like metaphor that I like to think of is kind of having your own business, because you can really work as little or as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it only really directly affects you, and you're only really accountable for yourself. If you fall behind, there's not really much of a consequence apart from having to work harder, I guess, to make up for that time. And unless there's something like an external circumstance, it's only really you who kind of can answer to that. So am I enjoying the program so far? I would say that on the whole, I am. I think that it's kind of nice to be able to work on a topic of my choosing, and I really enjoy the flexibility of it. Those are probably like the two biggest points for me that kind of sell the whole package. And yeah, I guess it's almost like I get all of the benefits of being a student again, like that freedom and the student discounts, but also some of the benefits of being a paid worker as well. Things like being taken slightly more seriously, even though I'm underpaid and probably not in the best financial position. If I was like working in industry, I'm still able to afford a better quality of life than if I was a student and working in hospitality again. And yeah, like despite all of the sort of negatives being generally hard work and sometimes quite stressful, particularly having to juggle multiple things, I do like having kind of the novelty of each day being somewhat different, and being able to choose if I want to have time off, and being able to choose on what I want to work each day as well is quite nice. And then something that was kind of different from my undergrad days, and I think this like depends from campus to campus, but I feel like the PhD cohort is a lot more close-knit compared to bachelors, and I guess this is just the product of us seeing each other almost on a daily basis in the same building. But it's kind of nice to feel part of a community that's trying to do the same thing. I do wonder if my description of this idyllic PhD lifestyle will change over the years, but I'll let you know and make another video. And with that, I think I'm gonna finish. Let me know if you enjoyed this kind of video style, and If you have any ideas for topics or if you have any questions, drop them down below, and I'll see you guys in another video. Thank you for watching.